Part 1 of 42. In the middle of a battlefield covered with a white blanket of snow, a solitary figure stood imposingly over heaps of corpses. An intense aura of mortality emanated from his body without him needing to look back. Coldly, he addressed the stranger who had just appeared behind him. The old man, glancing sideways, asked why he had come there when he should have stayed away. The man leading the Eastern conquering army lowered his head, clenched his fists tightly, and, with clenched teeth, responded that his goal was to defeat him. With this open declaration of war, the one calling him father pursed his lips with disdain, while his crimson eyes remained unfazed. Slowly, he drew a blood-stained sword and, in a tense voice, accused the other of planning from the beginning to use his army as bait, shouting for him to confirm if he was mistaken. "Father," cried the young man. The old man unflinchingly admitted, in an indifferent and mocking tone, that had been the purpose of those wingless ones. Then, he let out an ironic smile and commented, "Isn't that right, my foolish son?" Each bitter word pierced his heart like a dagger, fueling a deep fury. The presence of Usher Elman, the family of divine warriors par excellence of the continent, sworn protectors of the royalty with their swords, seemed to pulse inside him. Radek Main, the family's leader, was the only one possessing that supreme power, the highest authority in the entire nation. As he remembered how these powerful figures had saved him when he succumbed in a mortal snowstorm, he had sworn to follow their orders, jumping into bloody wars without hesitation, out of gratitude. But his childhood had been marked by humiliation and contempt. His brothers constantly mocked him, reminding him that someone without wings like him had no right to hold his head high, because the presence of wings on the back was a symbol of magical power. The more wings, the greater the strength. He, being the only one in the ducal family without magical powers, was labeled wingless. However, he devoted his entire existence to mastering the sword, turning his body into his only weapon, firmly believing that someday his efforts would be recognized. Thanks to his merit, he managed to gather loyal followers who fought alongside him. From a hiding place behind a tree, his sharp eyes perceived an ominous feeling and realized too late that he had fallen into a trap. Horror pierced his soul as he saw that his entire army had been carefully ambushed. Painful memories flooded him, and, in a scream of desperation, he demanded to know if this was the reward for his loyalty to his father. He trusted him blindly. The only response was a cold glance. Radek smiled contemptuously and asked what a mere instrument could expect. Part 2 of 42. With a determined voice, Krui announced that his mission was over and ordered him to disappear. Those words were like 1,000 blades fueling the burning fury in As's eyes. In a burst of rage, he ran wildly, raising his sword and shouting, "Father!" He had trusted him blindly, only to realize how naive he had been. With a sweeping strike of all his strength, he launched an attack against the traitor. The sharp blade brushed Radek's neck, leaving a line of blood that, for the first time, changed his expression. However, in the next instant, bright magical chains appeared out of nowhere and restrained him in place. His own brothers had attacked him. Despite being bound, Radek swung his sword in a fury, bleeding the ones trying to stop him. Pain pierced his body as the magical chains tightened, and blood started to flow from the corner of his mouth, but his fighting spirit remained intact. One of his brothers gave him an insolent smile and reminded him that a being without wings would always be a being without wings. The three, father and son, stood there arrogantly, looking down from above at Radek, now defeated in the snow. Another brother mocked him, claiming that he would always be where he belonged, on the ground. Radek, leaning on the frozen snow, raised a trembling hand and tiredly asked why, if they were going to abandon him, they had taken him in at first. Coldly, Radek himself ordered him to stop deceiving himself. He never really needed him. With force, he grabbed As by the hair and lifted his face, forcing him to meet his gaze filled with disdain. He moved closer, revealing the cruel truth. What he was truly seeking was the power of the 7 wings sleeping inside As. The surprise in As's eyes grew as he repeated incredulously, 7 wings! Radek's cruel smile intensified, and he added coldly that his mother had been a useful piece, a simple seed he had provided to gestate what he needed. The last image Aster remembers is of himself desperately screaming, demanding answers, as magical blades pierced his body. Gradually, his consciousness faded, immersed in a deadly cold that froze his bones, and his hands sank into the snow. In that final instant, he wondered desperately if this was truly the end of his destiny. If so, what meaning had his entire life had? Suddenly, a pale, gentle warmth enveloped him, and for a moment he believed he had reached the afterlife, until he realized it was snow. He felt someone holding him in their arms, a strange, almost tender warmth. His eyes opened wide. No, this wasn't a dream. It was reality. Confused, he tried to understand where he was and saw that he lay beneath the falling snow. Then he felt an even greater horror at how tiny his body was. As he looked at his small hands, he wondered if they were truly his. Not only did they look familiar, but they also resembled the hands of a newborn, and he was being cradled in someone's arms. He gazed at the woman holding him and saw that her efforts to breathe seemed like her last, as if she had already died. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice resounded in his mind, ordering him to find her. In a vision, he saw knights riding through a snowstorm, convinced that she couldn't have gone far. One of them shouted that, by the order of Duke Radek, they must recover the child she had and which she had kidnapped, regardless of the cost. The vision faded, leaving the child stunned and unable to understand what had happened. He remained there, overwhelmed, as the snow continued to fall relentlessly. He froze at the memory of the name his interlocutor had mentioned, Duke Radek. A horror was born in him as he realized that those searching for the newborn were actually looking for himself. The memory of being found in the middle of a snowstorm amid intense cold reappeared, planting a savage suspicion within him. Had he returned to the past? He tried to dispel the idea, but strange flashes of light flickered before his eyes, interrupting his thoughts. Although it was still difficult for him to accept reality, he decided to set aside that doubt for now and focus on the immediate danger. One thing was clear. If he stayed there, he would fall back into the hands of the ruthless Duke Radek. With the will of an experienced warrior, he forced his weak little body to drag itself out of the cold arms of the woman who, now without warmth, had given him life. Suddenly, a wave of golden energy burst forth from within him, fueling his desperate desire to escape as far as possible. The warmth of his tiny hands melted the thick snow where he touched, creating fragments that melted away quickly. However, a baby's body could not resist for much longer and collapsed into the snow, feeling his breathing becoming more difficult and labored. Amidst that piercing cold, his limbs burned as if they were on fire. A long trail of melted water marked his path across the white ground, but he could hardly drag himself another step. Despite everything, his eyes shone with unwavering determination. Above all, he swore he would survive. The image of his cruel father turning away from him appeared in his mind, fueling a vengeful oath in his heart. Clenching his teeth and pouring his hatred into the moment, with hands seemingly filled with light, he whispered with exhausted courage, "Radek, I swear." With the last of his strength, the tiny baby crawled forward with incredible perseverance, leaving a long trail in the snow. When he could go no further, he collapsed at the feet of a figure who had appeared just at that moment. A small girl eagerly pointed at the immobile boy and joyfully called out to her father, who they knew as Viscount Fred couldn't hide his surprise at the scene. Gently, he lifted the baby, puzzled by how an infant could have arrived in such a remote place. As he felt the warmth and security of the man's embrace, the little one fell asleep. Count Fred looked perplexed at the strange newborn in his arms, and his gaze was drawn to the long trail left in the snow by the child. Hard to believe. A baby who had traveled a great distance alone. As he gazed at the sleeping face, he couldn't help but wonder who this child really was. When he woke up, he found himself in a warm room, far from the furious storm raging outside. Still sleepy, he wondered about his whereabouts, and suddenly an illusion appeared before him. A child with hair as red as fire reached out his hand, as if trying to take him away. A gentle tap on his cheek snapped him out of the vision abruptly. Immediately, several small girls, adorable and lively, surrounded the child, and one excitedly announced to the eldest that the baby had awakened. The elder sister, with an authoritative tone, scolded the others for not ruining the cute nose of the infant, while the little warrior, trapped in the defenseless body of a newborn, could only watch in confusion as the girls surrounded him and manipulated him at will. Not understanding what was happening, he tried to fight futilely amid them. The eldest sister, a girl with silvery hair and a protective aura, managed to rescue him from their hands. Despite that, the little one curled up on her lap, with an expression full of distrust. Suddenly, with the will of an adult trapped inside, he tried to stand up to free himself, but his delicate baby body couldn't withstand it. He tumbled face first to the ground, startling everyone present. One of the girls screamed in alarm, not understanding what was happening. While frustrated and stunned, she began to crawl frantically after him, not understanding why they told her to stop or why they were chasing him. The comic chase ended when his tiny body could go no further and he was finally caught. Count Fred, at the right moment, managed to lift him and commented with amazement that this child was indeed very strange, falling from the sky so unexpectedly. His eyes widened when he recognized in the child Count Fred, the brother of Duke Radek. Surprised, he looked around, wondering if this place was another residence of the Elman family. Igra Elman, lord of the Viscounts and head of a lesser branch of the Elman family, had previously been an ally of his brother Radri, together forming the so-called support twins, the two right hands responsible for guarding the royal family. However, in the memories of his past life, Count Fred had tragically died in the midst of a civil war, causing the fall of his entire house. Seeing the Viscount alive and standing before him was the ultimate proof that he had indeed returned to the past. Still, he felt a bitter irony. In his attempt to escape from the Duke's home, he had fallen into the hands of his own brother. On the other hand, Countess Vic, who now held him gently, speculated that perhaps the child's spell had gone out of control, and that was why he had flown away. Convinced that he was not an ordinary baby, she looked at him with warm eyes and a sweet smile, very different from the cruelty she remembered. She softly hugged him, comforting him and telling him that he was probably very scared, but that everything would be all right now. For the first time in both of his lives, he felt the warmth of maternal affection, leaving him speechless and stunned by this display of kindness. From a close distance, Count Fred silently smiled, satisfied. He moved closer and announced that the boy possessed extraordinary power and that the mark on his body was the most obvious proof of it. When Count Vic lifted the baby's sleeve in front of a mirror, a bright red mark appeared. Countess Vic was horrified upon seeing it, her eyes wide open. She whispered in disbelief, "Are these the 7 wings?" While he, trembling, could not understand why the symbol of 7 wings had appeared on his body. At that moment, fragments of terrifying memories from his past life surged like relentless waves. He fully awakened to the cold truth. Radri's words echoed in his mind. What he truly needed was the power of the 7 wings hidden within him. From the beginning, he never intended to raise him as a son. His only purpose was to seize those wings. Despite that, he had called him wingless. After having torn off his wings in his previous life, his heart filled with indignation like a burning fire. At that moment, Countess Vic noticed the stark change in his expression and, worried, asked what he intended to do with the boy. Hearing her, he felt that the situation was truly dangerous. He could not allow that power to fall back into the hands of the Elman family. He needed it for himself to take revenge on that man. Without hesitation, Count Fred made a final decision. Fixing his gaze on her, he announced that he would adopt the boy. The surprise was so great that the Countess slowly reached out her hand, her eyes showing not the slightest hint of malice. Tenderly, she gently stroked the child's head and told him that he was still like a little bird, that he couldn't fly alone yet, but she would raise him until he could spread his wings and soar freely. A complex and fleeting expression flickered in the child's glassy eyes, and soon it faded. That kind of kindness was something he had never experienced before. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the room. One of Count Vic's daughters, who had been secretly spying behind the door, had tripped and fallen to the floor. The Count quickly turned around with a stern expression, asking whether two of his daughters had been listening. But it turned out that it was not two, but all three sisters, who had clumsily huddled behind him after her fall. The eldest sister awkwardly got up, scratching her head, and explained that they were only worried about the baby. Amid this warm family atmosphere, a blonde girl with red hair looked curiously at her mother, pointing at the newcomer in her arms. She eagerly asked what they would name him. The Countess smiled softly, looking at the boy with tenderness, as she gently lifted him under the soft moonlight. She named him Aster, which meant a rising star in her family, and thus a new chapter in their lives began. Time passed quickly. After a decade, in a splendid mansion, Vic Fred arrived, now considerably older, and was respectfully greeted by a soldier. Behind him, an agile young servant stepped forward to open the door of a luxurious carriage. Aster, who had once been a helpless baby, had become a handsome and refined young man as he stepped down from the carriage. Courteously, he turned to the girl with red hair and offered her his hand to help her descend, softly reminding her to be careful. She smiled brightly and expressed her gratitude, and for a moment, that mischievous childhood expression reappeared on her face, which Aster remembered with some tenderness. He looked at his sister Alphen's back with deep affection, and a mature confidence shone in his gaze. Together, they headed toward the important event, the annual sword dance gathering organized by the Dougal family of Elman, intended for noble knightly families. On the surface, it was an occasion to strengthen ties among the nobility, but in reality, it was also a battleground of fierce competition among the houses. Each family showcased the valor of their young swordsmen, bearers of honor and complete lineage. As they crossed the vast hall, all eyes turned toward them, and murmurs began to circulate among the crowd. Whispers of mockery and biting comments filled the atmosphere, some with subtle disdain, talking about the Viscount's house, as if it were only a humiliation for having adopted an unknown creature instead of a legitimate heir. Among the crowd, hostile and malicious glances questioned how far the Viscount family members were willing to go to tarnish the Elman name's reputation. Aster remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the imposing castle looming before him, lost in his thoughts. Perceiving her silence, Alphen clenched her nervously and whispered to her not to pay attention to those cruel murmurs, firmly adding that in a place like that, weakness would be crushed first. Aster remained silent, calmly observing the hostility surrounding him, and without changing his expression, maintained his serene attitude. Behind him, Viscount Fred spoke in a low, firm voice, explaining that this was the true situation of his house. In front of the majestic ducal castle, he said he wanted Aster to see firsthand this harsh reality. Then, he looked at his son and asked if he felt disappointed. Aster slightly turned his head and, with a confident and somewhat challenging smile, replied, "Not at all, father." That coldness was perfect for him, listening to his son's firm response. Viscount Fred let out a proud laugh, clearly satisfied. Suddenly, painful memories of his past life surged, reminding him of the humiliation and defeat of the old lineage. This very place had been the scene of his greatest social shame, a moment filled with bitterness and defeat. However, now, with the Seven Wings restored, the situation had changed completely. A flame of determination burned in his golden eyes, indicating that revenge was about to begin. Standing alongside his father and sister Alphen, Aster raised his gaze to the imposing ducal castle, a heavy symbol of his past and the impending struggle. From above, his two half-brothers from his former life looked down at him with arrogance and disdain, despite their condemning gazes. Aster kept his expression completely serene, with extraordinary calm hidden behind his bangs. He knew it was time to proceed with dignity and face everything. Confidence shone in his eyes as he silently thought, "We will make a spectacular entrance." In the vast hall at the center of the stage, a fierce fencing tournament was taking place, drawing all the attention of the gathered nobles. In an era when knights ruled, They were expected to combine overwhelming power with nobility. Power was demonstrated through masterful sword skills, while greatness emanated from the prestige and position of the family in the center of the room. There, two young fencers faced each other in a fierce duel, full of explosive energy with every move. They rapidly approached each other, closing the distance in an instant for a decisive clash. What happened next was a pure expression of strength and splendor, a manifestation of magical energy. With a precise blow, one of the combatants shattered his opponent's sword into pieces. The defeated young man froze, incredulous, just before collapsing. The victor stood proudly, displaying the symbol that represented his family lineage, the emblem of the wings. On the back of his hand, the two wings shimmered with a bluish light, an irrefutable proof of his power. From the balcony, Aster watched silently, with a firm and expressionless gaze, maintaining an impeccable composure. He thought that this place was still as intimidating as ever. No wonder his other sisters, his friend, and even freedom itself had firmly refused to come to such a hostile environment, ignoring the mocking looks he clearly recognized, filled with echoes of his past life. Aster's decision hardened like steel. A bitter memory haunted him, the humiliating defeat in the very same hall. However, when his gaze lost itself in the past, Alphen called his name with genuine concern. She asked if he was nervous because, after all, it was his first participation in a tournament like this. Aster, on the other hand, smiled with unusual confidence and replied that he did not feel nervous but nostalgic. His strange response disconcerted Alphen, who couldn't understand what he meant. At that moment, Count Fred apologized, saying he had to attend a conference and entrusted Aster with the task of looking after Alphen. She protested indignantly, reminding him that she was a year older than him. Aster shot her a mocking smile and said she was too clumsy. The Count, placing a hand on Aster's shoulder, advised him to take this opportunity to make contacts, as many young nobles of his age were present. Then, in a serious tone, he warned him not to let anyone discover the truth about the 7 wings. As the Count walked away, lost in his thoughts and reflecting on his adoptive father's warning, the gazes directed at him from every corner of the hall seemed only barely concealed hostility. He thought that, in such a clearly hostile environment, forming bonds, as his father had suggested, would be almost impossible. However, instead of retreating, a cold determination settled in his golden eyes. When Alphen saw him walk forward with a confident stride, she anxiously asked where he was heading. Without looking at her, he calmly replied that he was going to make friends. Confidently, Aster descended the large staircase and headed straight for a group of young nobles chatting on a sofa, led by a boy with red hair. The group looked at him with contempt and demanded to know who he was. Aster made a slight bow, wearing a confident smile, and introduced himself, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Brother Darius. Then, he formally introduced himself as Aster Elman, proclaiming he was his younger brother. Darius looked at him astonished. Aster added calmly that he had seen him from outside and decided to come and greet him. Another young man named Leo leaned toward Darius and explained that he was the adopted child taken in by the Count's household. Darius burst into manic laughter. Now he understood why that boy had dared to call himself Elman. At that moment, memories of his past death flooded Aster's mind. He recognized them clearly. Darius and Griot, the heirs of House Elman, who had killed him in his previous life. Those memories weighed heavily on his heart, intimidating him beyond measure. But now, under the bright light of the hall, those once terrifying monsters appeared as mere children playing with power. Sensing the tension, Alphen quickly took Aster by the arm, calling him by his name and expressing concern. She tried to pull him away, insisting that she had already greeted him and that it was time to leave. Darius's mocking voice stopped her, addressing her with a familiarity she found revolting. With a sardonic smile, he asked if she was hiding behind her father again and arrogantly ordered them to come closer and entertain them, declaring it to be an order from the main house. Alphen froze, rigid with her back to them. Her body trembled with tension, her eyes burning with fury at that humiliating command. She resolutely refused, asserting that there was no master-servant relationship between the main house and her extended family. Just as she was about to step forward to act, Aster quickly grabbed her arm, preventing her from making a reckless move. Firmly, he held her wrist and calmly told her that he was not finished speaking. His serene profile contrasted with the tense atmosphere, masterfully hiding his true intentions. Seeing this, Darius smirked sadistically, ready to stoke the fire further. He began openly mocking her, reminding everyone that her father, even though it was night, failed to protect the king, and as punishment, her own younger brother had amputated his arm. Each word of his contempt cut through Alphen like a dagger, forcing her to lower her head in shame and humiliation. And that was not all. Darius continued his cruelty, expressing how much he was grateful not to carry the blood of a loser who couldn't bear the burden. Alpha's anger erupted. She demanded he take back his words and, in a fit of fury, ordered him to stop insulting his father. Without hesitation, she threw a direct punch to Darius's jaw, causing him to step back. But even after that assault, Darius kept insulting her, coldly reminding her that only useless daughters were born into his family, incapable of inheriting title lands, and suggesting that her father was probably disappointed in her. With a cruel smile, he raised his wine glass and warned that this was not a dance floor. Then he threw the glass at her, splattering her dress and mockingly telling her to wear rags next time so she wouldn't worry about dirt, as if that mattered. At that moment, Aster stepped forward. As he walked toward that place, he wondered whether, upon seeing their faces again, he would feel anything at all, neither anger nor resentment. Quickly and smoothly, he took a bottle of wine from a nobleman who was paralyzed by surprise. But when he saw his sister standing there, humiliated, with tears in her eyes, her face bruised and bleeding, an odd sense of relief washed over him. He could still feel anger. Calmly, he called Darius by name and threw the bottle into the air with a defiant wrist movement. Just before the bottle hit Darius's head, it was stopped by an invisible force, suspended in the air. Aster looked at him with overt contempt and declared that they were still the same worthless trash as always. With a subtle movement, the suspended bottle transformed into a weapon ready to attack. In an instant, it exploded, drenching Darius in red wine from head to toe. Then he stood upright with a cold composure over the fallen bodies of the nobles, his sword still stained with blood. As Go desperately shouted his brother's name, wiping a stain that looked like liquid, he disdainfully commented that it was just grape juice. With a twisted, contemptuous smile, he added that this was the perfect drink for noble children like them. But they did not believe him. Suddenly, his memory flew back 3 years, to an explosion of golden energy and his father's shouting voice commanding him to control it. Amid the chaos, one sister was holding another unconscious in her arms, sobbing with tears and begging her not to kill herself. She begged her to resist. Alpha, his older sister, struggled in terror to help her calm down, while swirls of darkness and gold coiled around them. He remembered the power of the 7 wings, a force so dangerous that he himself could barely understand it. The image of his father, Count Fried, appeared in his mind, his face full of concern as he wondered if Aster would ever be able to master such power. He recalled his own struggle, the overwhelming energy coursing through his body, and his father's voice asking whether both of them could endure it. At that moment, a servant burst into the conference hall, shouting that something terrible had happened. Count Fred, with a serious expression, asked firmly, "What could be so urgent in the middle of such an important meeting?" The servant reported in a panicked tone that the children of the main Elman lineage were involved in a duel. The Count and his brother, Duke Aster, exchanged a tense look. Without wasting time, the Count jumped up and left the hall, his cape billowing behind him. Upon reaching the balcony, he found Alphen, distressed and running toward him, crying and urgently asking what had happened. A stocky man, with an expression of a sharp shark smile, pointed toward the arena below. He enthusiastically commented that a fight between the great brothers Elman was underway, something not seen every day. The Count and Alphen peeked out to observe Aster facing Darius alone. The man added that, depending on how the duel ended, the consequences would be enormous. This idea clearly seemed to unsettle the nobles present. With a sinister smile, Darius, with blood-red irises, predicted that this sword dance would soon become dangerous. In the arena, Darius, enraged, unleashed his power, shouting that some fool had dared to challenge the Duke's house. He insulted Aster, calling him a mere stray dog who didn't understand the difference in strength. Between them, the four-winged emblem on his hand shone with a blue light, causing murmurs of astonishment among the crowd, who intuitively realized that, as expected, the Duke's son was on a completely different level. With the tip of his sword close to Aster's face, Darius smiled smugly and demanded that he show his own wing emblem, or if he was too ashamed after seeing Darius's. Aster replied with an unsettling calm, saying that only boasting about a pattern was ridiculous and that, in reality, it was embarrassing. With a slight smile on his lips, he stated that he would never do something so vulgar. The vein on Darius's forehead throbbed violently. His face reddened by the humiliation he felt at Aster's unexpected insolence. Aster, calmly, proposed his terms. If he won, Darius should apologize to his sister. Darius accepted without hesitation, assuring that if he won, Aster would be his dog and that he would use him relentlessly. Without another word, Darius charged forward at a dizzying speed. His swords clashed in a burst of golden sparks, with a roar echoing throughout the arena, marking the start of a duel that clearly went far beyond a simple spectacle. Aster took a firm fighting stance, his sword steady in his hands, while an aura of dust, wind, and whirlwinds formed around him. His golden eyes focused with intensity, and his grip on the hilt tightened as the imminent charge approached. With an arrogant smile on his face, Darius unleashed his own energy and claimed that this was the strength of someone who truly possessed an emblem. With a vehement roar, he launched a series of quick, cutting strikes through the air, leaving gusts of cutting wind behind. From the balcony, Alvin shouted Aster's name, his face pale with terror at the ferocity of the attack. Next to him, a burly man simply smiled smugly and commented that the young Darius's sword technique was still immature. However, Darius's overwhelming magic more than compensated for any technical flaws. A violent wave of power emanated from him, demonstrating the advantage of those bearing winged emblems. In his arrogance, Darius thought that if one wing contained the magic of a candle, then his wings could be a true explosion. Flames erupted in a relentless rain of fiery strikes. He mocked Aster as he pushed him back, asking what had happened to the audacity he had shown earlier. Unfazed by the storm of attacks, Aster faced the tempest with steel-like calm, blocking each blow with precise movements. Darius sneered, teasing him, asking if he didn't want to force an apology after all, or if those had only been empty words. With an angry roar, Darius demanded that Aster demonstrate his power, pouring all his energy into a final, devastating blow. From the stands, a bearded noble smiled proudly and declared that the fight was decided, but Aster responded by unleashing his own aura. Aster's sword shone with a pure white light, and their forces clashed in a colossal explosion of red and golden energy, creating a breathtaking display of raw magic and physical strength. Deer's face twisted in disbelief, unable to comprehend how his ultimate strike had been detonated. Aster offered a half-smile and simply said that he talked too much. With a smooth and elegant movement, he deflected Darius's sword and executed a spinning kick, sending him flying across the arena. Aster landed lightly, his body wrapped in tentacles of golden energy, demonstrating a control that Darius could never reach. For 10 long years, in the Viscount's house, he had trained to master his magic, patiently waiting for the day of his revenge. That day had finally arrived. With an upward charge, Aster unleashed a brilliant burst of power that tore through the very air. The golden light roared toward the sky, while the arena trembled beneath the force of his attack. A golden blaze of power erupted from his sword, and the impact pushed Darius backward, unable to withstand the pressure. He tumbled clumsily, his knees hitting the ground with a crackling shudder as he struggled to rise. From a distance, his brother Gria watched in disbelief, stammering that Darius had been completely overwhelmed by the green and golden energy enveloping him. Darius's face contorted into an expression of shock, barely able to comprehend what was happening, as he furiously shouted that he had 2 wings. Aster remained motionless with a cold, calculating expression. With a swift and decisive movement, the golden energy danced along the blade of his sword, concentrating its power into a single point. The noble spectators held their breath as they witnessed it. One whispered that perhaps Aster could win, while another commented that Darius was being completely dominated. Suddenly, a final explosion of golden energy erupted from Aster's blade, sealing the outcome of the fight. A murmur of astonishment swept through the crowd. The Almond family still had someone among its members with such power, although Aster's golden aura intensified even more. Dark tendencies began to seep from his body as his energy grew to terrifying levels. From the gallery, Desk and Hafford frowned deeply, whispering that this was extremely dangerous. Deer's expression contracted in pain as the overwhelming pressure of Ayres's energy pressed down on him. Without warning, a traumatic memory from his past flooded him completely. The image of one of his brothers cutting off his arm with a malicious smile hit him hard. Crazy laughter echoed in his ears, reminding him of the cruelty he had suffered. In the present, dark and golden energy erupted violently from Aster, his face marked by uncontrollable rage. Amid the whirlwind of power, Dayar shouted curses, trying to resist the overwhelming force crashing over him. Above, I often shouted in panic, begging Aster to stop, but it was too late. The strength of the 7 wings was unleashed entirely, detonating in a blinding explosion that created a giant crater in the center of the stage. When the dust settled, the man with very broad hands remained standing, arms crossed with a serious expression. Aster's sword was plunged into the ground, just a few centimeters from Darius's terrified face, stopping just in time. Darius, sitting on the ground, completely defeated, listened helplessly as Aster returned his cruel words with a cold stare. In a cutting tone, Aster advised him to wear rags next time so he wouldn't have to worry about getting wet. Aster turned and sheathed his sword calmly, declaring to himself that he was no longer the unsuccessful, wingless failure everyone had known. From the gallery, Alphen watched him with a mixture of relief and amazement, his heart still pounding strongly. Aster allowed himself a small smile, reassured by the fact that his sister was safe, at least for now, which was enough to calm his mind. Suddenly, his golden eye flashed with a red gleam. He sensed a new presence, a figure clad in dark crimson energy descending from the ceiling and falling heavily into the center of the hall. Aster's gaze sharpened instantly, recognizing the ominous figure making such a dramatic entrance. At the top of the grand staircase stood an imposing man, Duke Raedry. His presence filled the room with an unbearable tension. A single word escaped Aster's lips, charged with hatred and determination. Roderick. The spectators continued to murmur, unable to understand how the youngest son of Count Vic had managed to defeat the third of the main house at that moment. The situation had reached a critical point. After such a humiliating public display, it seemed impossible for the esteemed main residence to remain inactive. The imposing figure of Duke Rain, the 8th head of the house, slowly descended the stairs. Darius, still on the ground, looked up with a mixture of fear and relief, as if his coming signified salvation itself. Aster stood still, his eyes fixed on the man who embodied all his pain and desire for revenge. The Duke's expression became stern and difficult to interpret as he examined the scene carefully. Aster sensed an oppressive atmosphere, filled with power and hostility, emanating from the man who, in a previous life, had betrayed and murdered him. Despite the unbearable pressure in the hall, Darius began to crawl forward, his body trembling with humiliation. Clinging to his father's leg, he pointed at Aster with an expression twisted by hatred. He called him a street dog that dared to challenge the house, begging his father to use his power to put him in his place. Instead of helping him, Rodri struck the floor with his hand right above his son, causing a piercing cry of pain as his bones cracked under the pressure, and his hand was crushed beneath his father's palm. The young nobles watched in horror and confusion. Unable to understand the brutality of the Duke, Go's face turned pale as he witnessed his own father's cruelty. Raedri looked at his defeated son with pronounced contempt and asked why he was smiling so stupidly. After tarnishing the family's name from the balcony, Desk and Halfridge nervously cried out, begging Radek to stop his fury, but the Duke remained unfazed. He declared that someone incapable of revenge had no right to carry a sword, raising his hand as if to deliver the final blow. At that moment, Granhall fell into tense silence, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Darius, on the ground, could do nothing but tremble, his face reflecting both humiliation and terror. However, the fiery fury blazed in Duke Radek's red eyes, now directed at the one who had become the center of the chaos. The Duke pointed his sword directly at Aster and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Aster remained calm. He responded with steadiness that his cousin had not yet apologized to his sister. "The word sister," he said quietly. Then, with surprising audacity, he looked at his uncle and asked if the punishment could be postponed until after the apology. Raedri, surrounded by a threatening purple aura, let out a mocking laugh. He asked if, being an orphan child adopted by a noble who had made him feel part of the Elman family, he believed that made him a true member. Aster did not hesitate. With resolve, he proclaimed that he was Count Vic, and that his father had taught him to value a knight's honor and the responsibility of carrying the family name, even without sharing the same blood. The Duke fell silent for a moment, his expression hardening as he processed the young man's defiant words. Flames erupted around him as he accused Aster of unnecessarily damaging the reputation of their noble house, the pride of which had peaked after observing 12,000 knights from the balcony. The sturdy man emphasized that they must understand him clearly, while a young boy with light blue hair and a slight smile added that this could hardly be considered a mere childish fight. A deep voice from another recalled that his father had once offered an arm as the price for relinquishing loyalty. Now, Duke Radek's sword tip pressed coldly against Aster's throat as he was forced to respond what he would offer in exchange. Courteously, Aster explained that it was not a dispute between brothers, but a legitimate duel, and that he had responded to insults against his house simply with his sword. Duke's eyes burned with silent fury at the bold yet logical answer from the young man. Aster met his gaze without hesitation, repeating the Duke's harsh words, that one who cannot take revenge has no right to wield a weapon, and declared that he had no intention of surrendering even a finger. From above, Alphen trembled as she watched the scene, while the bulky man accompanying her gently patted her head, trying to soothe her. The young blue-haired boy sighed in disbelief, whispering that Aster was only 10 years old and that it seemed like a joke. Duke Radrik remained silent for a long moment, his red eye shining with dangerous intensity. Finally, he drew his own sword and simply said that he understood. In a cold, authoritative tone, he ordered Aster to draw his sword. The boy hesitated for a moment, not expecting the Duke himself to intervene. Before he could react fully, the ground beneath him cracked open and an invisible force hurled him into the air. The Duke's sword tip struck the ground where Aster had just been, unleashing a devastating shockwave. Alphen stifled a scream, her eyes wide with terror at the display of power. Deskin Halfrey shouted his brother's name, his face contorted with rage over what he saw as a cowardly attack. Without hesitation, he leapt from the balcony and stepped between the Duke and Aster, his swords shining in a blue arc. The weapons of the two brothers clashed with sparks and tremendous force. At last, a duel between the heads of both houses was underway. The shockwaves from his attack echoed throughout the entire hall, clearly demonstrating the enormous disparity in power. Count Vi, standing beside Aster, urgently asked if he was all right. In front of them, a stone pillar erupted from the ground, blocking the Duke's path. The Count's expression reflected surprise and concern at this defensive technique. Aster struggled to rise, his body marked by blows and blood streaming down his forehead, but his spirit remained unbroken. His eyes shone with an even more intense light, a fierce mixture of pain, fury, and unwavering resolve. Duke Aster watched the scene with a slight, superior smile, satisfied with Vince's reaction. Without a word, he spun around and started walking toward the stairs. Effortlessly, he leapt agilely and landed on the balcony next to his defeated son. The corridor, scarred by destruction, lay behind them as Count Vic let him go and placed a protective hand on Aster's shoulder, keeping him steady amid the residual vibrations of power. The Count, visibly shaken, held Aster in his arms, calling him with a voice laden with concern. Though his face was covered in blood and bruises, Aster managed a satisfied smile and assured his father that he had kept his promise and that everything that mattered was secure. A look of relief and pride was reflected on the Count's face as he confessed that Aster had been magnificent. Meanwhile, Duke Radek withdrew with his defeated son, leaving behind an atmosphere of tension. The sturdy noble approached the Duke with a slight smile and commented that his reaction had been somewhat childish. Radek paused for a moment before coldly explaining to his humiliated son that if he had allowed the boy to say whatever he wanted, the reputation of their lineage would have been completely tarnished. What he had done, he claimed, was a reasonable commitment. Far from the confrontation, the nobles whispered in surprise. A promising newcomer had bravely challenged the great Duke Radek and emerged unscathed, rising as an up-and-coming figure. The mustached noble admitted that, although the idea of a division within the Elman family worried him, the young man couldn't have had a better debut socially. In the shadows, the Duke watched with a somber expression, aware that a time of upheaval was approaching. A storm powerful enough to split the world in two. Back with his family, Aster was warmly embraced, with Alphen expressing concern, while his father held him proudly. Blood stained his face, yet in his eyes, a victorious smile still shone. Aster was speechless. The scene shifted to the training grounds of the Vicone estate in Elmhain. Several knights watched as a training session unfolded. Two of them faced each other with swords. With a carefree smile, one of the knights praised his master's performance, calling it splendid. His admiration for Aster was evident when he spoke of her. The knights surrounding him muttered among themselves, noting that Aster's fencing was terrifying for someone her age. They observed that her training had become even more intense since the sword dance meeting. One of them recalled how Aster had defeated the third son of the Elmhain family, and they could not hide their satisfaction. The main family had looked down on the Vicone house for years, and seeing one of their own assert themselves against them was deeply encouraging. As Aster continued to defeat opponent after opponent, his thoughts drifted back to the sword dance meeting. He had shown enough strength and presence to silence those who considered his family a disgrace to the House of Elmhain. He still knew that the true test was yet to come, in Elmim's main residence. He wished he could have faced more opponents there to measure his limits. However, at that moment, he understood that, with his current level, he had no chance of defeating Rodri Elman. Asking for a wing badge was only a sign of his magical potential, but innate magic was a useless gem if he couldn't master it fully, and he still hadn't exhausted all the power of the 7 wings. He wished he wasn't afraid of losing control and turning berserk. Then he could truly test the limits of that power. Finally, after a confrontation, Aster defeated the last knight still resisting. Several others lay on the ground, while his gaze remained calm and resolute. He calmly asked if anyone else wanted to face him. Before anyone could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. Alphen appeared and commented that he was already demanding too much of himself. He asked if Aster knew what resting was and told him that his father was calling him. Aster accepted immediately, saying he would go to see him. On his way, he looked at his sister's dress and commented on it. At first, she looked confused, not understanding what he meant. Aster explained that it was unusual to see her in such attire, as she usually didn't like it, considering it not cute enough. She replied that the important thing was maintaining balance, and after watching him train, she had realized she couldn't stay the same forever. Her words surprised Aster, leaving him momentarily speechless, especially when she raised her training sword with a confident smile. She said that when he returned, they would spend a lot of time together. Aster accepted the challenge and kindly asked her to be gentler with him. Later, he arrived at his father's office. When he entered, Elfrida indicated that he should sit down. Aster obeyed, sitting across from his father with a serious expression. Haift mentioned that 10 years had passed since Aster joined the family. He acknowledged that initially he thought about waiting until Aster was a bit older, but decided it was time to move forward. He placed a small box on the table, from which he took out a ring. Hifford explained that this ring was a symbol of succession, a token of the upcoming head of House Viscount. Then, he declared that he wanted Aster to be his heir. The young man was left paralyzed, surprised, unable to speak. Haift told him that he wished for him to inherit the house. Aster remained silent as his father explained that, although the family branch was in a delicate situation, they still bore the Elmy surname. As the rulers of their territory, they had much to protect. The responsibility of the lineage weighed heavily on his shoulders, and Haift stated that the position of next head could not remain vacant forever. However, Aster's first thoughts were about his sisters. He asked if they would accept this decision. Count Vic informed Aster that his older sisters, who were currently studying at the Knights Academy, would return in 3 days, and then he planned to reveal the entire truth to him. Aster quickly thought of Marfa and Kudo, imposing and powerful figures, always with a defiant smile. He believed they would not be particularly happy about this, especially Kudo, whose fury would be hard to contain. His family history clarified that Kudo disliked him only because he was blessed with the 7 wings. Hearing this, Esther's face hardened, and with unwavering resolve, she declared that she could not accept the proposal. She turned slightly and admitted that she couldn't even fully control her own magic. She considered herself an immature young woman, a fool who had nearly destroyed his own sister. In the vast and silent library, she expressed that someone like her lacked the confidence to persuade an enraged sister, much less to take on a leadership role. She silently rejected the honor. Count Vic listened attentively, a slight smile on his lips, and finally broke the silence to confess that he often wondered if Aster was truly a boy. Ignoring her rejection, he opened a long wooden box and said that he initially thought of giving him a ring as a reward for his sword dance, but perhaps something more useful would be better. When Aster saw what was inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. He asked in amazement what that thing was. The Count showed that it was the blade of the magical sword that controlled the power of the 7 wings, the devouring magic sword. Later, in a secluded clearing in the forest, the Count declared that this place would be suitable for what they had to do. Confused, Aster asked why they had come so far just to test the sword. Count L responded simply that it was a precaution, and an ironic smile escaped him as he pointed out that Aster tended to break things, recalling several occasions when his uncontrolled power had caused destruction. He appropriately handed over a legendary sword, passed down only to the firstborn of the Elman family. He had retrieved it from the main house for him. With a precise movement, he drew it from its sheath. Aster was completely bewildered. Was that really a sword? As could be clearly seen, it had no visible blade. The Count smiled and explained that when magic was channeled into it, an ethereal crimson blade would emerge from the hilt. As he demonstrated, a red spectral edge appeared, leaving Aster speechless. The sword, he said, was complete with the magic of its user, transforming into a true weapon of power. With a single motion, the Count unleashed a powerful shockwave that cut across a wide stretch of the forest. Trees split apart, and a whirlwind of wind and debris spread out, demonstrating the overwhelming strength of the weapon. However, he warned that with mediocre magic, the sword would quickly deplete its energies. It was a genuine devouring sword, and he extended the luminous crimson pommel for Aster to take. Count Vic asked if Aster would try. Without hesitation, the young man took the initiative, closing his hands over his father's in a symbolic act. As his fingers touched the pommel, his magic, in the form of golden arcs and energetic tentacles, quickly entwined and directed toward it. An energy explosion erupted around him, forming a violent and uncontrollable storm. He felt his magic flowing automatically into the sword, an overwhelming sensation that took his breath away. Back on the training grounds, a red beam of light shot into the sky, piercing through the clouds and leaving everyone stunned. One onlooker exclaimed, wondering if a comet had fallen, but his companion shouted that it was the opposite. Something had ascended into the heavens. From a distance, Alphen watched the chaos. Although his description was vague, he recognized the energy immediately. There was no doubt. It was Aster. In the forest, Aster collapsed onto the ground, utterly exhausted but with a pure, amazed smile on his face. Breathless, he admitted that the sword was truly exceptional. Count Vic looked at him with an expression that combined admiration and severity, explaining that what was truly extraordinary was not the weapon, but the unimaginable power residing within him. In a deep voice, he revealed that in all of Elm family history, no member had ever possessed a symbol of 7 wings. As he ventured further into the forest, he assured him that if he managed to master that power, he would become a swordsman far superior to 6-winged warriors, even Raidri. Roderick's image crossed Aster's mind, and the thought of surpassing him ignited a burning desire for revenge and ambition in his golden eyes. However, his father warned him seriously that such immense power would always bring conflicts. Clenching the handle of Gran tightly, Count Vic explained that if someone discovered he possessed 7 wings, and that his emblems shined on his back as a visible mark, many would envy or even hate him. Like ghostly hands trying to drag him into darkness, some would seek to manipulate him through deception, while others, perceiving him as a threat, would not hesitate to eliminate him. Therefore, he advised him to control his power so that, at the crucial moment, he would not regret his defenselessness. Firmly, he encouraged him to grow stronger, to increase in power and confidence. Aster took his father's hand, heart filled with gratitude, silently promising that he would never again live a miserable existence like the one he had endured. Looking directly into his eyes, he expressed his sincere thanks and swore to master the 7 wings, no matter what it took. 3 days later, Count Vic and his wife waited in the grand hall for their daughters to arrive, returning after a long time. 2 young women descended the stairs, one with short red hair, expression lively, and the other with long white hair and a gentle, peaceful face. The girl with red hair proudly announced that Kadriaka had returned. After clearing her throat to regain composure, she extended her arms with a radiant smile, inviting her beloved younger sisters to approach and hug her. However, the 2 younger ones quickly ran toward the girl with white hair. Marfa, happy to be home again, remained alone in the middle of the foyer. Kudo blinked in confusion, wondering why no one was hugging her. The little ones explained, curling up next to Marfa, that it was because Sister Kudo always dirted her hair, crossing her arms with an offended expression. Kudo vehemently denied the accusation, assuring that she had learned proper gentlemanly etiquette perfectly and would never behave inappropriately. But her serious face crumpled as soon as she saw her sister Alphen, who greeted her with a joyful shout. She threw herself forward and hugged her tightly, almost without letting her breathe, asking aloud whether she had been good during her absence. Alphen struggled desperately to free herself from the tight embrace, demanding to know why she was holding her so firmly. Wakudo, meanwhile, continued his overly enthusiastic greeting. The girl with white hair noticed that someone was missing and asked about Aster. Count Vic responded with an enigmatic smile, simply saying, "Oh, that boy." Instantly, Kudo's expression turned cold and serious, her face losing its warmth to adopt a tone of rigid determination. Meanwhile, in a corner of the forest, a violent column of red energy erupted from Aster's sword. The young man fought desperately to control the overflowing power, jumping and swinging his blade repeatedly in an attempt to master it. Finally, he dropped to his knees, exhausted and covered in sweat, cursing his inability to fully control the weapon, unaware that his sister was already searching for him. A single strand of his hair had turned white from the tension. Although he could form a blade with magic, suppressing the sword's true power drained him completely. The clearing in the forest was marked by craters, clear signs of his struggle to harness that energy, while he thought about how easily his father managed to control it. Suddenly, a familiar voice snapped him out of his thoughts, joking that he could see he was once again fully surrendering himself. Startled, Aster turned around and greeted his sister Kudo, asking when she had returned. She responded with a sly but sharp smile, reproaching him for not even going to greet their older sister. She raised an eyebrow, wondering if he thought he was so special that his family didn't care about him. She mentioned she had heard about the sword dance and that the Nocturnal Academy was full of rumors about it, adding that their father must be very proud. Aster dismissed the praise, insisting that she was truly impressive. Even as a novice, she had stood out in numerous missions, and he continued praising her, saying he heard she was the only knight to receive the Medal of Honor that year. Kudo responded indifferently, asserting that if she couldn't even do that, she would never inherit their father's position. Then she looked him firmly in the eyes and asked directly if he was rejecting the opportunity to be her heir out of consideration for her. Aster, murmuring that their father had explained to him that he still didn't feel ready, remained silent for a few moments with his gaze cast down. After a while, he turned and began walking away, bitterly complaining that both their father and she herself were cruel, because they knew this was his dream but still offered the inheritance to his brother. His figure disappeared between the trees, leaving Aster puzzled by her sudden change of mood. Without warning, she spun around and unleashed a powerful blue energy blast in his direction. The explosion tore through a tree as effortlessly as butter, forcing Aster to dodge just in time. The thick trunk fell to the ground nearby, causing him to jump back, afraid of being crushed. Landing lightly, he asked what she was doing all of a sudden. With an aura of radiant power, Kudo smirked defiantly and declared that, after so long, her older sister was finally testing him, with a fierce smile and her sword resting on her shoulder. She warned that now she would fight with all her strength. Aster's face filled with panic as she tried to stop him, begging her to wait and explaining that her sword was not finished yet. She responded coldly, asking if he could use the same excuse in front of an enemy on the battlefield. The word enemy echoed in Aster's mind, reminding him of the gravity of the situation. Adopting a combat stance, Kudo reminded her that a knight's creed was to always be prepared to fight and warned that if she held back too much, she would crush him. His first strike was so powerful that he barely managed to dodge it. Realizing that this was no mere test, and seeing in his eyes the true intention to kill him, he understood that he had no other choice. Desperately, he unleashed the crimson power of Gran. When the red energy of his sword violently clashed with her blue aura, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. She really did want to end his life. The battle moved deeper into the forest, away from watchful eyes. From a distance, it seemed as if lightning was striking between the trees, and flashes of light illuminated the scene. Kudo clenched his teeth in mid-spin, causing his sword to arc through the air with sharp curves. His expression was cold and unyielding. He told Aster that she was still as skilled with her sword as always, admitting that he didn't expect her to match his level after so much time at the Knights Academy. After all her training and growth, Aster continuously blocked his attacks, spinning with agility and precision, and managing to land a crushing blow that sent him flying backwards. Coldly and mercilessly, she declared that her control over mana was pathetic. Aster slid along the ground, leaving deep scars in the earth with her boots. However, she managed to stay on her feet, forcing herself not to fall. Raising her gaze to her, he commented that she was still as ruthless as he always remembered. His thoughts refused to stray from the past. Kudo had always been like that, fierce, confrontational, and resolute in his decisions. As the only one in the family with the right to inherit and bearing a seven-winged shield superior to all others in the house, he had always been a quiet, irritating presence to her. For her, everything about him seemed unfair. She grew up as a storm challenging every perceived injustice, and if she were honest, she was her natural enemy. Suddenly, she leapt into the air agilely, forming a silhouette against the canopy of trees. Aster knew what was coming. His sword descended like a weight of judgment, tearing through the forest floor and generating a violent shockwave that spread in all directions. Standing over him, she declared that he was unworthy of becoming the next head of the family. Elsewhere, in his father's chamber, Alphen stood by the window, voice trembling with anxiety as he asked whether it was truly wise to let the brothers fight alone. He feared that such recklessness might lead to tragedy. His father calmly replied that Aster and Kudo were rivals, perhaps reckless, but not enough to cross that final line. Although still uneasy, Alf insisted on finding out why they had been called back from the academy at night. She sensed that it was not just about succession. Then, her father opened a drawer and took out a sealed letter bearing the Elmhine family emblem. Alf's heart clenched upon seeing it. He explained that it was a formal summons, and that the elders, who controlled the fate of the family, wished to see their grandson in person. She silently wondered if it was truly so serious, and her father answered without hesitation that, in the worst case, they could lose Aster. In the forest, the battle continued without signs of slowing down. Their weapons clashed in a constant exchange, shockwaves passing through the trees like a heartbeat of destruction. Amidst the clash, Aster urged Kudo to stop talking nonsense. He reminded her that she had already refused the successor position. She knew that decision better than anyone. Irritation flickered across her face as she raised her sword high, declaring that her refusal was exactly something unacceptable. The blade fell with overwhelming force, and Aster barely managed to stop it in time, feeling the power of the strike leave him stunned. He felt as if he was fighting more than a swordsman, like facing an ogre. She, wielding a giant war hammer, increased the pressure, pouring all her strength into each blow. At the last moment, Aster twisted his wrist, flipping his sword and diverting the attack to the ground. He demanded firmly that she finally listen. She only smiled faintly and asked if he was already trying to run away. At that moment, she unleashed all her brute strength, determined to end the fight. Aster was thrown sideways with tremendous force, crashing into a tree so violently that the bark exploded around him. Blood poured from his lips as his eyes revealed incredulity. Kudo watched him coldly and told him that if he only knew how to wield a sword, he was a third-order brigadier. Even those who relied solely on magic only reached the second category, and only those who mastered both swordsmanship and mana deserved to be considered first-rate. She expressed her deep disappointment. The difference in the crest of the wings, she explained, directly reflected the mana capacity. Having a single wing was almost equivalent to tripling the power. Although she possessed 5 and technically fewer due to her lineage's stages, and she had 7, Aster avoided direct confrontations with her brute strength, preferring to hide behind refined technique. With a gentle smile, he asked her if he truly lacked confidence in himself, or if he was afraid of losing control again, as he had 3 years ago. His words cut deeper than steel. Aster froze in place, and an unwanted memory surfaced in his mind. Had he been afraid all this time? Had he subconsciously suppressed his own power because of that incident? For the first time, he began to question himself. His gaze fell on his sword, murmuring if that very suppression was the cause. Swordren always seemed unstable in his grip. Kuda's expression hardened even more. She told him that he possessed everything she had ever desired. If he intended to let those blessings go to waste out of ignorance or arrogance, he should give them to someone who truly valued their worth. She advanced, intending to finish him off without restraint. But this time Aster did not retreat. He faced her attack with determination, and the clash of their swords rang out in a thunder that filled the forest. To his surprise, he managed to repel her. His support wavering as an expression of disbelief flickered in his eyes. Congratulating her with a sad smile was his response. Thanks to her, he said, he had finally managed to awaken. Then he charged forward with all his strength. Kuda frowned, puzzled by this reckless assault. Why was he attacking without having stabilized his sword? Had he run out of mana? The idea seemed impossible. However, during his advance, a torrent of mana began to flow toward his sword, overwhelming and steady, fueled by the 7 wings on his back and an almost inexhaustible reserve. He knew he still couldn't control it precisely, so he relaxed his restrictions and let his power overflow in a single, pure act. The impact struck with unstoppable force. Kuda raised her sword to block the charge, stabilizing herself instantly. But even so, She could sense that something in Aster had radically changed. After halting his attack, she took a deep breath, a small smile filled with enough irony curling on her lips. She asked if he had truly thought about the consequences or if he had simply acted on an impulsive whim. Aster looked at her without hesitation, determined. He no longer harbored doubts. With clarity, he confessed that he would not waste a second chance at life. This time, he intended to take everything that had slipped from his grasp in the past. The power of the 7 wings, Graham's deep wound, and even his place in the family. These were battles he had fought desperately, and yet he had never managed to win them. Hearing the phrase "a second life," Kuda stiffened for a brief moment, as if a spark of surprise flashed across her face. Subtle, but unmistakable. Seizing that small opening, Aster moved swiftly. The mana energy surged fiercely toward his sword as he closed the distance in the blink of an eye. He jumped high, concentrating all his strength at that crucial moment, his sword ready to fall with final resolve. And in an instant he disappeared. Kudo's eyes widened in confusion, as he lost sight of him amid the action. However, Aster had not completely vanished. Instead, he had crouched down to further reduce his mana, pushing it into a denser and more concentrated current. The pressure around him increased as he poured all his energy into the edge of his sword. He had openly declared that there would be no more restrictions. Kudo immediately sensed the changing atmosphere. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, and he understood without a doubt that the fight was coming to an end. Aster lowered his sword with overwhelming force, causing the air to creak as it split under his unstoppable attack, forming an arc of mana that collapsed with a thunderous noise. Moments later, Kudo slowly woke up, not in the forest, but on the familiar ceiling of his room. For a moment, he couldn't understand how he had gotten there. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, where his older sister Malfa sat silently by the window. Malfa turned her head and calmly remarked that Kudo had taken a long time to wake. The young girl immediately sat up, in a sharp voice, demanding to know what had happened in the duel and what the result had been. Malfa gently smiled and explained that Aster had taken her back himself, assuring everyone that Kudo had fallen asleep during the fight. According to him, fatigue after returning from the Night Academy had overcome her, and she had simply lost consciousness. Kudo lowered his gaze silently towards his sword, not accepting that explanation. He clearly remembered the final moment when Aster's blade had stopped just a few centimeters from her, and the overwhelming sensation of his mana, so powerful it seemed to split her in two. However, just before his attack reached its peak, he dispersed it instead of hitting her, leaving only a shockwave that rocked her and rendered her unconscious. At that moment, he understood something simple and irrefutable. No matter how much Aster denied it, he would never kill his own sister. However, for a brief moment, he had come to believe that he could do it. A light smile crossed his lips, more youthful, though Aster had become something several times more formidable and frustrating. What an unbearable little brother he had become. Suddenly, he stood up, grabbed his sword, and asked Malfa where Aster was, with sharper, more determined eyes, declaring that he would not accept a duel that ended like that, in such a humiliating way. Next time, they would start all over with full strength from zero. Malfa's expression slightly changed. She informed Kudo that Aster had already left the castle. Kudo froze in place as Malfa explained that the main house had summoned him and that earlier that same day, he had left with his father. Noticing the confusion on Kudo's face, Malfa asked if he truly hadn't received the summons. Anger rose in Kudo's voice as he demanded an explanation of why he hadn't been told. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage steadily advanced along the forest road beyond the castle grounds. Inside, Aster sat silently across from his father. His father explained that the person he was about to meet was one of the ancient lords who, in secret, supported the Elmhine family. Though no longer holding public office, the former leaders of the main family and the minor branch, along with their most powerful advisors, still wielded overwhelming influence. They no longer sought the spotlight but ruled discreetly from the shadows. He added that these elders had never shown interest in Aster since his adoption. that they had summoned him now was of great importance. Aster listened calmly and said that it was most likely related to the sword dance assembly. He mentioned hearing that the elders of Elmhain valued family honor above all, even more than gold or life itself. Anyone who dishonored it, he warned, would be thrown into beast cages to be fed. Aster's father looked at him with disbelief and asked where he had heard such an extreme story. Terrified, Aster replied that he had heard it long ago, but then, more firmly, declared he was prepared for anything, punishment or exile. After a moment of silence, his father asked if it really didn't bother him to leave without saying goodbye to Kudo. Aster weakly smiled and said no, that their departures were scheduled to coincide, and it was better that way. He thought that if he wasn't there, and since Kudo didn't like it, perhaps she would feel more at ease if he weren't present. He added that thanks to her, he had learned to wield Graham's sword better. Now he could unleash the power of the 7 wings more freely. Looking him seriously in the eyes, he told his father that, whatever happened, he shouldn't ask to be rescued, because he was ready to survive on his own. His father tried to speak, as if to reprimand him for these reckless words, but before he could, a voice called out from outside the carriage, asking why Aster was acting so dramatic if he was the youngest of all. Aster was stunned to see Kudo clinging to the side of the moving carriage. Her expression was stern, defiant, and her eyes shone with unmistakable determination as she stared directly at him. Without hesitation, she climbed onto the moving carriage as if their upcoming journey had always depended on her presence. Kudo climbed completely into the carriage without hesitation, and immediately turned to Aster with eyes full of intensity. He wanted to know why she had disappeared without saying a word to her older sister. His tone reflected a mixture of anger and disbelief. He added that he had heard about the summons of the heads of the lineage, whether it was an honorable occasion or perhaps a threat, something neither she nor Malfa had ever experienced even once. Hyft's voice sounded weak, reminding him that she could not accompany them to the main lineage because the matter was too delicate and dangerous to involve her. But Kudo, maintaining a calm posture, took a seat beside Aster. She expressed that she already understood the situation. Her father had called her and Malfa from the Knight Academy to guard the estate in his absence. She wasn't naive and made it clear that she was aware of the implications. However, her expression hardened when she mentioned that a summons from the main lineage indicated that the situation was serious, enough to require utmost caution. Malfa herself had warned that there was a real possibility Aster might not return. Aster tried to downplay it with a calm smile, saying she thought too much and that she was only going to talk, promising to return soon. But deep down she knew the truth. Her safe return was anything but guaranteed. Suddenly, Kudo raised a finger and pointed it directly at him. He ordered him to listen carefully. Without beating around the bush, without softening his words, he admitted that he hated him. Aster was left speechless, surprised, but she did not hesitate. She simply expressed that she hated that he was a man in a family where being a man, having that advantage, granted him privileges. She hated that he had 7 wings. She hated that they always treated him as someone special. She hated that he was stronger than her older sisters. She hated his maturity despite being the youngest. She hated everything about this situation. Gradually, her voice grew softer. No matter how much she despised those injustices, she was still family. No matter how strong he appeared, no matter how unshakable he seemed, he was still her little brother. With her head held high, proud and without a trace of doubt, she ordered him to return to normal conditions so they could resume their duel. Next time, they would start with all their strength from the very beginning. A faint smile played on her lips as she said she wouldn't allow him to escape with such an easy victory. Without another word, she jumped out of the moving carriage as easily as she had gotten in. Aster, startled, quickly looked out and asked his father why he had gone to such lengths just for that. He saw his figure shrink with a proud expression and replied that it seemed like an appropriate farewell to him. Aster smiled calmly. Turning back, he saw Kudo standing on the road, confidently waiting for them in front of the moving carriage. In his heart, he silently thanked her and, with firm resolve, made a promise to himself. No matter what awaited him in the main lineage, he would return. Upon reaching the main residence of the Elmheim family, Viscounts Hyfried and Aster were greeted by a team of guides. From the moment they set foot on the grounds, their captain was waiting to give them a formal welcome. Without beating around the bush, he announced that the Grand Elder was already expecting them inside. Viscounts Hyfried calmly responded that he did not need a guide, as he knew the way well. However, the captain insisted firmly, as they had strict orders to accompany them at all times. The atmosphere confirmed that the call was not merely out of familial affection but served another purpose. The tension in the air was palpable, rigid, and measured, more than a simple courtesy visit. Despite this, as Aster looked around the familiar surroundings, he felt a gentle nostalgia overwhelm him, as if it had been a long time since he last came home. Quietly, his gaze wanders over the estate as memories surface, but he says nothing. With no other choice, they continue their path alongside the guides. As they advanced, Viscounts Hyfried spoke in a low, serious voice, warning Aster. "I understand, Aster. Don't be too impulsive, at least for today. No matter what they tell you, listen and respond without hesitation." Her reply was simple but firm. "That will depend on how they act." Aster's father exhaled lightly and added, "The problem lies with the other side. Let's proceed carefully." Before he finished, Aster, who had been staring elsewhere, casually interrupted. "Darius is not here. Since they crushed his dominant hand, it seems difficult for him to return for now." Upon hearing this, Viscounts Hyfried looked at him attentively and asked, "Are you paying attention?" Aster, who had been distracted in his thoughts, responded calmly, "Yes." Then he added with calm, since he had been told to return safely, "Today I will remain silent as they requested." They arrived at a massive door that slowly began to open, its heavy movement echoing through the corridor. Upon entering, the captain announced clearly and formally, "Lord Hyfried and his son have arrived." At the end of the vast hall, an elderly man with a venerable appearance spoke in a measured tone. "Finally, you have arrived. Has it been more than 10 years? Father and son advanced together, slowly approaching. A slightly amused voice responded, My grandson Hyfried." At that moment, Viscounts Hyfried bowed deeply, lowering his head in a sign of respect. It had been a long time. It was the sixth head, actually the Grand Elder Aster, who remained composed. As he felt the old man's gaze upon him, he pondered what truly ruled in the shadows of Elmheim, the monster hidden behind that facade. He was the sixth head of the family, Zenith Elmheim, surrounded by some of the most influential and powerful members of the family. Among them, he recognized a few faces he had seen at the sword dance festival. His gaze briefly swept the hall before he posed his question. Almost casually, he mentioned that Roderick was not present. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but before anyone else could react, the sixth leader interjected sharply. "That man is not here, child. He is the commander of the knights who serve directly under the royalty." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, filled with authority and unspoken tension. At that moment, an overwhelming and terrifying presence emanated from the eloquent figure, dense and suffocating, as if an invisible shadow crushed the entire room. His mere presence was enough to dominate the space, while he continued coldly. He had no time to deal with trivial matters. "We, the veterans, handle the administrative tasks." Hearing this, Aster appeared seemingly calm, though inside, his thoughts moved silently. He didn't care before, because in his previous life he never had the chance to see them, but gathering so many high-ranking officials without the current leader's presence, even in retirement, demonstrated significant weight. The influence of the sixth leader was undeniable, and despite his retirement, his authority seemed absolute. Finally, Count Hyard spoke, with a restrained yet firm voice. "And what are these trivial issues?" It is the sixth leader of Elmheim, Zenith Elmheim, who added a low, almost sardonic laugh. "Have you guessed already?" it seemed to say. His sharp eyes shifted slightly toward Aster as he continued. "I heard your dog caused a big commotion at the sword dance festival." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and cutting, increasing the tension in the room. Aster lowered his gaze for a moment, then raised it again, his golden eyes steady and unshakable. He already knew, he thought to himself, because in his past life he never had the opportunity to witness it. Vicon Highfried responded calmly after hearing the accusation. If that's the case, the current leader Roderick resolved the matter and closed it, he said, but the old man immediately interrupted, dismissing the explanation as a mere public act. Zenith Elmheim corrected him coldly. That does not change the fact that Elmheim's reputation has been tarnished. Adopting a child of unknown origin was a mistake in itself. If he had been harmless, perhaps we would have overlooked it. His voice grew increasingly severe, and the atmosphere charged with each word. But if that boy shows his fangs in the main house, there is no other option but to expel him. At that moment, a murderous presence flooded the hall, much more intense than before, and suffocating pressure that ruthlessly crushed everything. Of course, the sixth leader continues to stare straight ahead. He will not escape appropriate punishment either, Lord Highfried. The threat is clear, and the room falls into tense silence, without a single breath. After hearing everything, Aster intervenes firmly. Wait! I did everything myself. My father had nothing to do with it. At that moment, Vic Countries remains silent. The young man makes no move to stop his father nor speaks aloud to him. Seeing his progenitor's silent attitude, Aster gradually calms down and also falls silent. Zenith Elmheim observes the scene with keen, expressionless eyes before speaking again. As I suspected, he lacks the discipline necessary for a boy who tries to interrupt while adults are talking. With that, the sixth ruler slowly rises from his seat. That movement alone shifts the atmosphere in the hall, making it even more oppressive. We lead 12,000 knights under our banner, he declares in a deep, authoritative voice. We bear the emblem called Elmheim, but the knights are not a homogeneous army. Numerous individuals constantly watch over the summit of power. His gaze sweeps over those present, leaders and elders, making the meaning of his words clear. Power in Elmheim is never stable. It is always contested. In a hall full of ambitious figures, even a small breach in reputation can become a weapon. The person in charge advances again, his tone becoming cold and measured. We only seek peace, proof that we are not the ones who could bring harm to Elmheim. With a gesture, he signals for a sword to be handed to Vicon Highfried. The blade gleams with overwhelming and violent energy, sweeping through the hall like an almost uncontrollable storm. Do you remember, says the sixth ruler coldly, that you could not protect your son and sullied Elmheim's name? Right here we made Roderick cut off that arm. As he unleashes an even heavier wave of murderous intent, the pressure becomes almost unbearable. This time, he declares mercilessly, cut off the head of that child, and we'll consider the matter closed. His words are like a sharp dagger. Vicon Highfried does not hesitate. I refuse, he states with determination. If I had to kill my own son, I would gladly prefer to take my own life. His voice reveals no fear, only absolute resolve. Hearing this, Astra whispers only, Father. Unable to say more, as her tongue is tied, she cannot continue speaking. The sixth ruler remains standing, his oppressive presence flooding the room, overwhelming and unrelenting. His expression does not soften. Then, in a calm yet terrifying voice concluding with finality, he says, They should all die, you, your wife, your daughters, that little fool over there. The silence in the hall is absolute as his threat hangs in the air like an executioner's sword ready to fall. From this day, the House of Vicon is dissolved. The declaration sounds like a final verdict. Immediately, numerous knights step forward to obey the order. The shine of steel reflects as they surround Vicon Highfried, whose swords are drawn and ready. The intent to kill overflows at the sight of his father encircled by swords from all sides. Aster steps forward and raises his voice. Why are you so afraid, great elder? Zenith Elmheim narrows his eyes. What? Aster does not retreat. His golden gaze remains steady as he continues, with a sharp tone and fearless determination. If you're afraid that a loyal dog might bite you, it's deplorable to see grown adults trembling and gathered like that. The hall falls silent, impressed by his boldness. The decision is made: exile, execution, or whatever they wish. But if they try to lay a hand on my family, without hesitation, he begins to unbutton his shirt. His father observes silently, knowing full well what his son is about to reveal. Before facing the elders again, Aster softly whispers to his father, "I'm sorry. It seems I'm not very good at staying silent after all." A nearby knight looks at him in disbelief and exclaims, "What is that?" It's the emblem of the 7 wings on his back. Aster remains standing straight, clearly displaying the mark. At that moment, he declares with authority that echoes throughout the room, "These 7 wings will make Elmheim our enemy. Think carefully about this. The threat is no longer hidden. It's direct, absolute, and cannot be ignored." Hearing this, someone states, "Impossible. Could that be the emblem of the 7 wings?" Another elder adds, "That's a forgery. For centuries, this mark has appeared on the bodies of humans." But the burly elder firmly asserts, "Without a doubt, this heraldic symbol is unmistakable." Watching the scene, Zenith Elmheim steps forward, his voice heavy with gravity and significance. "Do you understand what you are showing now? Do you truly grasp what that implies?" His words hang in the air, tense and persuasive. Hearing this, Aster responds almost indifferently, though a strange confidence is in his tone. "Isn't it obvious? The more wings there are, the more shocking the revelation will be." At that moment, attention shifts to a figure with blue hair who observes carefully. Instead of panicking, a calm, slight smile appears on their lips. "No, sorry. Please, continue." Their gentle laughter contrasts sharply with the tension of the surroundings. Meanwhile, another nearby person seems visibly disturbed, clearly uncomfortable with what they are witnessing. Watching everyone's reactions, Zenith speaks again, this time in a grave and solemn tone. "First of all, that winged insignia is an organ that produces magical power, a power that spirits have shared with humans for a long time, passing it down through generations. Over time, humans have managed to deepen and strengthen that power. However, no one has ever been known to attain the 7 wings." His words send a shiver through the room. Aster's expression tightens slightly. "Are you saying I belong to the spirit race?" Zenith keeps his gaze fixed on him. "If those 7 wings are real, then perhaps so be it." The tension intensifies, and simultaneously, we see Vic, the Count, silently observing his son with an expression full of impact from the revelation. But Aster presses forward with conviction, without hesitation. "I am the son of Count Vic's house," he declares firmly. "From now on, that doesn't matter." His voice becomes colder and sharper, filled with determination. "What I want to know now is whether you are willing to make me your enemy." The air seems to come to a complete halt at the resonance of his words, which turned the revelation of the 7 wings into a much deeper and more dangerous threat. A defiant statement that does not hesitate to continue, speaking in a calm but calculating tone. "Suppose they manage to expel me from Elmheim," he says calmly. "Many people in Marshall's nobility would surely welcome the 7 wings eagerly. If that happened, for those already living in fear of rebellion, it would be an even greater threat." His words, although not loud, are precise and forceful. "Instead of dismissing me, they should want to keep me close, as a symbol that even surpasses Duke Roderick himself, the bearer of the known sign as the 7 wings." At that moment, there isn't a shadow of fear in his eyes. There is no doubt, no hesitation, only blinding clarity. Upon hearing this, every member of the chamber appears visibly uncomfortable. Doubt and the weight of his reasoning fall upon them like an imminent storm. What he proposes is not just a matter of personal survival, but a political strategy. He seeks a shift in the balance of power, a dangerous possibility that none present can easily ignore. Meanwhile, in his own mind, Aster remains silent. Just as the old man mentioned earlier, Elmheim is not a unified force. Cracks already exist within it. The insurrection is already underway, ready to unleash a civil war that will devour the entire kingdom. He has seen that future before and knows that, to survive and protect the Viscount's house, he cannot remain passive. At least, in this moment, he must quickly discern who his enemies are and who could be allies, even if it involves risking himself. His determination becomes more solid, more firm. This is no longer just about the 7 wings or noble pride. It is preparation for the inevitable storm, one that only he perceives clearly and knows is coming. Hearing all this, Zenith Elmheim reacts with palpable anger. His authority looms over the entire room. "Do you think you have that much courage?" he asks harshly. There is not even evidence that those 7 wings actually exist. Their words aim to halt the momentum that has been built. Doubt, authority, and intimidation intertwine in his tone. But instead of backing down, Aster shows a confident smile. "If you think they are not real," he responds calmly, almost provocatively, "then kill me right now." The room falls silent, tense with anticipation. Then he continues, "It will become a war between me and all of you." Inside, however, his thoughts move carefully behind that defiant expression. Killing someone like me at this moment would be easy. But if Elmheim is truly serious about this, what will you do? Will you fall into the trap? He wagers, not recklessly but deliberately. He knows they cannot act carelessly, especially when uncertainty about the 7 wings is high. The tension rises, like a taut rope about to snap, when suddenly, a figure with blue hair quickly rises, softly clapping as if enjoying the entire scene. The conversation seemed locked in a never-ending cycle. The elderly man, turning slightly toward the others, casually proposed that, for now, a trial be imposed. At that moment, the most corpulent elder tensed in protest. "What do you intend, Count Maze?" he interrupted without losing his relaxed attitude, with a faint smile that highlighted the power of his 7 wings. "You want to see it, don't you?" His gaze sharpened slightly. "It won't be too late to decide its fate afterward." The air changed once more, and what began as a dispute transformed into something much more dangerous. A trial that could confirm Aster's accusation or seal his ultimate destruction. "What do you all think?" asked the blue-haired noble calmly. The residence of the well-known Marshall family was an appropriate setting to prepare one or several suitable trials. Hearing that name, Aster's thoughts sharpened. Had he mentioned Count Maze? There was no doubt that individual was an ally. The perception firmly settled in his mind. The timing of the suggestion and the course of the conversation were a kind of lifeline disguised as curiosity. After a long pause, Zenith Elmheim finally spoke, his tone cold but controlled. "Very well. Follow me." His attitude conveyed the authority of someone deciding to teach a lesson to a grandson who didn't know how to behave. Teaching a young person who doesn't understand how to act also falls under the responsibility of elders. So he turned and led those present toward a heavy structure standing in front of them, in the testing grounds. It was a dark and gloomy place. Beyond this darkness lies an underground refuge connected to the water channels, Zenith explained, pointing to the entrance. Originally built as a place of emergency evacuation, we are now housing a magical creature. He paused deliberately before continuing. "The task is simple. You must defeat that magical creature. Nothing more." The simplicity of his words made the challenge seem even more daunting. Upon hearing this, Count Fried, an imposing figure, showed an expression of deep frustration. "What a situation!" he exclaimed bitterly. He was always a troublesome boy, crying and screaming non-stop. "However, I warned you several times that the existence of the 7 wings must not be revealed." His voice reflected both disappointment and concern. Aster remained silent, analyzing the situation. Then, without further discussion, he stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. "I can't keep such a conspicuous secret forever," he said calmly as he pushed it open. The heavy door swung with a click, releasing thick, icy darkness. What's inside is not just a creature, Aster thought. It's a test. Without hesitation, he walked toward it. Hearing his son's determination, Count Fried, with authority and worry in his voice, warned him for the last time, "Stay on guard, okay?" Aster responded without hesitation. "I'm on my way." Then, he turned his gaze toward the blue-haired noble who watched him with a calm, interested smile, as if everything was just a simple act of composed curiosity. That smile was etched in Aster's mind as he began his descent. As he entered the underground refuge, darkness enveloped him completely. The air was heavy and stale. Thick humidity permeated the environment. Silence became absolute, so dense it was almost palpable. The darkness was undeniable, though it did not prevent one from discerning the figures lying in the shadows. Then something caught his attention. A stern, bloodied head lay on the ground. Despite the scarce light, the scene made it clear whose it was. At that moment, a cold, distant voice echoed from above, breaking the silence with austere authority. Well, I even gave him the chance to clear his name, though he only cried and shouted until the end. It was unbearable to watch. The voice referred to Duke Rodri, whose corpse lay ahead of him, and his words carried a faint warning. Don't disappoint me now. The message was clear. This is not just a test, but an unappealable judgment. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and from the darkness emerged a colossal presence. In front of Aster appeared a giant beast, terrifyingly powerful and intimidating in appearance. Its roar filled the entire underground chamber, shaking the walls with a force that threatened to crack them. Aster clenched his sword tightly, which shimmered faintly in the gloom. From above, the same voice thundered with resolve and mercy. Let the judgment begin. Below, the scene shows Aster in silence, contemplating internally. So all that was true, that Elmheim harbors a magical creature inside its mansion, and only this time. He feels pity for Darius, who was born in that house full of monsters. At that moment, we see his trembling hand touching the ground. Just then, the beast lets out an equally monstrous roar, with a power that shakes everything around it. The ground itself seems to vibrate beneath that force. Aster calmly prepares himself, saying, "Nevertheless," but as soon as he pronounces these words, he lunges forward at incredible speed, leaving everyone stunned. In a blink, he pierces the creature with nearly superhuman speed. In an instant, the body of the beast is sliced into many pieces and falls to the ground in scattered parts, leaving everyone speechless. From above, the crowd witnesses the scene in complete amazement. After landing, Aster conceals his thoughts and casually comments, "For me, Sister Kudo is much scarier than this." But just then, something shocking happens. Instead of disintegrating, the fragments of the beast begin to move slowly, recomposing themselves before their eyes. Piece by piece, the creature begins to regenerate. When Aster perceives this scene, his face fills with incredulity. With an expression of bewilderment, he whispers, "What is this? It can't be. That's a no-mort." And indeed, the beast that seemed destroyed into pieces stands up again as if nothing happened. Without delay, the creature lets out another terrifying roar. From above, an anxious voice suddenly rings out in alarm. "Vic, undead! Why is there something like that in this mansion?" The scene shifts to show Zenith Elmheim carefully observing everything unfolding. A cold, sinister smile slowly begins to appear on his face as he speaks in a calm voice. "These creatures are attracted by the scent of death. They were just brought down there, believing they would find many fresh corpses to devour. No matter how much we defeat or burn them, they simply can't die. In the end, we captured them and decided to keep them as perfect enemies to test someone's strength." He continues speaking in the same unshakable tone. "Thanks to this, we no longer have trouble disposing of the bodies." Hearing these words, an imposing old man with an astonished expression responds immediately, "Even experienced knights can barely manage to capture a no-mort, and you say we should kill it? Do you really plan to let the seven-winged boy die in vain?" Upon hearing his concern, Zenith Elmheim smiles even more coldly and replies without hesitation, "If that happens, it will only prove that he was nothing more than a braggart. A badge of wings without power hardly deserves to be called decoration." From above, everyone remains silent, watching the scene unfold below. Xena continues speaking with absolute indifference. "Don't worry. Even if I die, there are still ways to make use of it. In fact, for us, that might even be more convenient. At that moment, her cold words fall into a deathly silence, heavy with the icy and ruthless meaning they carry. Meanwhile, the blue-haired boy silently observes the confrontation in front of him, still thinking to himself, "After all this talk, don't you dare die easily, Aster." Our attention returns to the fierce battle between Aster and the magical beast. From their clash, waves of energy of incredible power emanate, spreading throughout the area as the fight continues. During the fight, Aster analyzes the situation in his mind. After attacking repeatedly, he thinks, "No matter how much I cut it, it doesn't seem to have any real effect, and this regeneration is unhealthy compared to a normal undead." He continues to carefully watch the monster's movements, reminding himself, undead are already dead from the start. Despite all these problems, he remains steadfast against the creature, not taking a step back, determined to face it bravely. As he fights, he mentally recites the basic rules. To completely kill such a creature, it must be burned in the sunlight or purified with a holy weapon. If neither of these options is possible, the standard strategy against the undead is simple: do not fight. However, he immediately rejects that idea. Retreat is clearly not an option. With an increasingly determined look in his eyes, he thinks, if I just rely on basic tactics, then there's no point in being one of the 7 wings. Although facing an almost immortal enemy, Aster stands firm, unwavering, ready to continue the fight. Deciding to find his own way to defeat the monster, Aster clenches his fists and whispers to himself, "I need to prove my worth." This resolve burns inside him. Suddenly, he makes a sharp leap forward, delivering a powerful strike directly at the opponent. His attack is filled with incredible strength. As he completes the movement, he shouts loudly, overcoming the corpse with his pure power. At that moment, a terrible explosive wave arises from the collision. The mighty explosive energy shakes everything around, sending clouds of dust and shockwaves in all directions. The spectators above are stunned by the force of this explosion. One of the elders stammers in astonishment, "What an incredible magical power!" Others look down with wide eyes and say, "It seems to be the power of the 7 wings." Soon, a voice appears from the emptiness, filled with curiosity. "What's going on down there? Did he defeat him?" Meanwhile, calm and silent Zenith Elmheim observes the scene without any reaction. As the dust from the explosion slowly dispersed, a figure appeared on the battlefield. It was Aster, unharmed and standing firmly on his feet. Upon seeing this, Zenith Elmheim let out a quiet sigh, clearly disappointed. A wasted opportunity. But before anyone could truly understand what had happened, the magical creature suddenly launched an unanticipated attack on Aster. The attack moved so quickly that Aster didn't have time to react. In an instant, he found himself directly beneath the monster. The enormous creature above him let out a terrifying roar, its horrid face looming directly over him. Watching this scene from above, Countef suddenly cried out in excitement, calling Aster by name. The 8-armed boy with blue hair suddenly spoke. "Please, don't interfere with him, Lord Heift. Don't rush into battle." Hearing this, Viscount Hai turned to him with rage and exclaimed, "You want us to just stand by and watch him die?" Seeing his anger, the boy calmly raised his voice to stop him and said, "Calm down. Look down again." Apparently, he still had a card up his sleeve. After these words, everyone's gaze immediately returned to the battlefield. There, Aster was visible in extremely bad shape after the attack. Despite his wounds, he still stood. Moreover, he was smiling. Watching what was unfolding, Aster whispered softly, "All right, it seems everything is working correctly. It's a bit sleeker than before." With these words, he slowly raised his sword and directed it straight at the monster in front of him. His posture clearly indicated what his next move would be. In just a moment, an explosion of energy emanated from his sword, rising in the form of a blazing pillar of power. The intensity of this energy was simply astonishing, so overwhelming that it struck the monster before him in a single attack. The terrifying creature was completely annihilated in an instant. As he unleashed this force forward, Aster shouted with fierce determination, "This will continue until you die." While everyone watched this demonstration of destruction, Vic County Freed was completely stunned, watching as the overwhelming attack unfolded before his eyes. Memories of a technique he had shown once before started flooding into his mind. However, as he observed the released energy more carefully, he began to notice that something was not exactly the same as before. Upon closer analysis, he was surprised to realize that it was different, completely unlike what he remembered. The furious energy spreading across the battlefield continued to surge with unimaginable power. The force was so massive and terrifying that even the elders atop the heights could clearly feel it, causing the entire zone to tremble at the magnitude of the attack. Suddenly, one of the elders shouted alarmingly, "This place is also going to collapse." Another elder quickly warned urgently, "Elders, retreat. This is getting out of control." Panic swept over everyone, as that destructive power threatened to tear everything apart. However, amid the chaos, one figure remained remarkably calm. It was Zenith Elmheim, silently observing the scene. Finally, with a cold and serene voice, he spoke, saying, "So this is the true strength of the Seven Wings, witnessing all that has happened." The man with yellow hair was completely stunned, eyes wide open, trying to understand the situation unfolding before him. With a trembling voice, he asked, "What the hell just happened?" Clearly, his expression reflected deep concern and confusion about what he had just witnessed. Still trying to process what had occurred, he quickly added, "And what happened to the magical beast?" From nearby, Zenith Elmheim continued to watch every detail attentively. Analyzing the enemy's destruction, he calmly commented, "All of this was caused by a raw impulse, based solely on the amount and quality of magical power, as one would expect from someone with the Seven Wings." Then he turned his attention toward Vic County Freed and asked calmly, out of curiosity, "Was that part of your plan?" Upon hearing this question, the countries nodded slightly and replied, "Honestly, no, sir. Even I am surprised by how much my son has grown." Sincerity and genuine surprise were evident in his voice, as if even he hadn't expected he possessed such overwhelming strength. At that moment, from behind, the man with blue hair intervened. Approaching Zenith, he respectfully asked, "Then, Honorable Elder, have you accepted the trial?" After hearing the question, Zenith Elmheim looked at everyone present, searching for any sign of rejection on their faces. Not detecting any opposition, he announced quietly, "I don't believe anyone here has objections." Hearing this decision, the man with blue hair immediately looked up and loudly shouted toward the figure up high, "Did you hear that, Aster? You passed. It would be a good idea for you to come up soon." The young man's voice responded from above, though with a somewhat awkward tone. "From up there." He explained that the chain he had used to descend had also been destroyed in the recent attacks. "Could you lower a rope?" he asked. Then, the scene slowly shifted to a quiet room, where Zenith Elmheim was sitting with an impassive expression, as if having decided something important. Looking at Aster, he spoke firmly, "Wouldn't it be better to seize this opportunity? After this, there won't be a second chance." His words carried a tone of irrevocability, as if that moment signified a change that would never recur. Aster, without hesitation, responded calmly but with determination, "I'm not interested in contesting the succession of the main family. If someone like me stayed in the mansion, my cousins wouldn't rest easy. After all, my place is high up, among the upper ranks." His response was simple and modest, accepting his role and position in that world with calm acceptance. However, upon hearing these words, Zenith Elmheim began to smile softly. His laughter was not mockery, but filled with amusement, as if he could see something hidden behind Aster's serene words. With a slightly mocking expression, he commented, "And you think that sounds humble? Do you believe you can hide the ambition reflected in your eyes?" His eyes studied Aster carefully. Then, he added more seriously, "Are you planning to draw your sword against Elmheim in the future? Utopia's Rodri to get his head." The blunt question momentarily puzzled Aster. The accusation was so sudden that he didn't know how to react immediately. Observing this confusion, Zenith laughed naturally again, relieving the tension with a relaxed gesture. "Don't be so defensive. I don't need to read your thoughts right now, Aster." After hearing all this, Aster finally spoke again, unable to contain his curiosity. Glaring at him, he asked, "Why are rebels not your enemies?" When he heard this question, Zenith Elmheim looked at him with a much more serious expression than before. The slight smile that had appeared on his face disappeared immediately, replaced by a calm yet heavy tone as he replied, "Like I told you, we're not a united bloc either. That rhetoric needs to have character. If your goal is to act as a restraining force for him, that's fine too." The man's gaze sharpened, and the atmosphere in the room instantly grew tense. "But if you ever show your teeth, you know what will happen, right?" The warning was clearly spoken. It wasn't a fierce threat, but the force in those words made its meaning very clear. Hearing this, Aster fell silent for a moment. He seemed outwardly calm, but inside he harbored a bitter thought. "Damn old Elmheim monster," he thought bitterly. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Vickin Alto Liberato entered, looking directly at Aster. With a frank tone, he asked, "Are you done talking? What did he tell you?" Aster turned to him and answered calmly. "He said he wanted to integrate me into the main family, but I rejected that offer." Hearing this, Vickin's eyes widened in disbelief. "What?" he exclaimed surprised, clearly not expecting that answer. At that moment, another voice emerged nearby. "What a waste! If you had officially joined the main family, you could have gained much greater benefits than you have now." The voice belonged to the man with blue hair. Upon hearing this, Aster looked at him carefully before asking, "You're a count, aren't you?" And he added out of curiosity, "Why did Luna make that proposal to you earlier which seemed to benefit me?" The man with blue hair looked puzzled by the question and responded dismissively, "What are you talking about? I only felt some annoyance toward a brash kid who seemed quite arrogant." Then he approached, placing a hand on Aster's shoulder with a friendly but confident attitude. "Setting that aside, from today onward, in name and in fact, you are a son who possesses the 7 wings." With those words, he gestured around the surroundings and added, "Look around you." As Aster looked around, he began to perceive the expressions of the people present. Although many remained silent, their thoughts were clearly reflected in their gazes. Some looked at him with fascination and desire, others with cautious calculation. In their minds, many were thinking the same, "Those are the 7 wings." Some couldn't help but feel greed upon seeing them. They thought, "I want it. That power must end up in my hands." Others, much more cautious, devised darker plans. Before he becomes an obstacle, he must be eliminated. After all, he's still just a child. There are always ways to use someone like him. The atmosphere around them filled with hidden intentions, ambitions, and strategies, perceptible in people's reactions. Count May, with blue hair, turned back to Aster in a calm tone. "As you yourself mentioned, the emblem of the 7 wings already has a great reputation in itself. From now on, the number of people trying to recruit you will begin to grow significantly." Hearing this, Aster gave him a direct look and asked bluntly, "Are you one of them too?" "Maze, perhaps." For a brief instant, the man with blue hair seemed slightly surprised by the question. However, he quickly regained his usual composure and replied, "Although it may not seem like it, I am part of the Council of the Knights Academy." After hearing this, Aster silently observed him, thinking to himself, "He's a rather strange man. Maybe it's still too early to consider him an ally." At that moment, Vicon Alto gently approached and placed a hand on Aster's shoulder. With a satisfied expression, he said, "Very well, we should also be leaving. You still have to tell your sisters how magnificent your performance was today." Aster nodded slightly and replied, "Yes, father, although if my mother saw these wounds, she would probably faint." Then the scene shifted again, this time inside another noble residence. The environment there was much quieter, but the ongoing conversation conveyed a serious tone. A knight stood respectfully while delivering a report. Captain of the Guard. It is reported that the young Darius died during the trial conducted by Sir Zenith a few days ago. Upon hearing this, the man sitting across from him responded silently. I understand. The person speaking was none other than Roderick. After a brief pause, he continued calmly. I have also been informed that Alto Libertad's son has been summoned by the elders of the main family. What happened to him? The knight hesitated for a moment, a silent thought crossing his mind. Does he not even care about his own son? Despite this thought, he maintained his composure and answered respectfully. Yes, I also have some information about that. Before the knight went further, Roderick spoke again, as if he had already guessed the answer. Just as I thought, that young man also possessed the 7 wings. The knight looked surprised and immediately asked, Did you already know? Roderick leaned slightly, in a calm yet contemplative tone. If this continues, the balance of power that has been maintained in Elmheim for so long could collapse. The knight asked cautiously, Shouldn't we take some action? However, Roderick simply dismissed the concern with a slight wave of his hand. Let it be. If Elmheim tried to face a threat of this magnitude, it would have disappeared long ago. Then, a slight smile appeared on his face and he added, Besides, although I'm not in a hurry, sooner or later those wings will be mine. His eyes darkened slightly as he continued. Until then, I'll let him enjoy his freedom. Let's see how long that creature who escaped that day can hold on. I'll enjoy this for a while. The girl with 7 wings asked him. As she spoke these words, anger and hostility were clearly reflected on her face. The scene changed completely once again. Years later, a powerful voice echoed loudly in a vast open space filled with people. This is how applicants aiming to enter the Dorasil Knights Academy are registered. Once the process is complete, they quickly move on to the next step. The place is crowded with young candidates coming to take their entrance exam. Among them, a muscular soldier spots someone in the distance and, with a gesture, draws the attention of the person next to him. Is that the famous one? He asks. The other quickly turns his head and responds. It can't be. I've heard he's much more bulky. Meanwhile, at the registration table, an official pushes a document and speaks firmly. Neither the kingdom nor the Knight's Order will be responsible for injuries or accidents during the exam. If you agree, sign here. Then he presents the emblem of the wings. The official continues reviewing the candidates. We can't let anyone go without magical power. Very well. Then the symbol of Aster and Elmheim's wings. Just as he was about to correctly pronounce the name, his tongue suddenly faltered. He looked up at the figure in front of him and, visibly surprised, fell silent. The young woman standing there slightly tilted her head and calmly asked, Did you say I should present the emblem? Mine is in a place that's difficult to show. Can I just use my face? The person who was there, with a relaxed smile, was none other than Aster.